If you love magic and romance, then you probably know the many works of my guest today. She's a New York Times best-selling author who has written more than 30 works of fiction, including Practical Magic, which was adapted in the 1995 film of the same name, starring Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock. And now, just in time for spooky season, she's here to chat with me about the fourth and final novel in the Practical Magic series, The Book of Magic. Alice Hoffman, welcome to the middle.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. So tell me about this new book, which I love, without giving too much away.
All right. Well, I started off writing Practical Magic 25 years ago, and it was made into a great movie with Nicole Kidman, Sandra Bullock, Stockard Channing, Diane Weiss, like all these great women. And I just never thought of it as a series, but I started to get letters from readers saying that they wanted more. And so I went back in time and I wrote 2 other books that were back in time. And now this is the final book that takes place right now. And kind of is like closure for readers and also for me, because this is a long time to be living with these characters.
Yeah. So, I mean, to have that gap in between writing the first one and then getting back into it and creating a series, obviously the readers, you said, wanted you to do it, but was there a specific spark that inspired you to sit down and continue the story? And do you feel like happy or sad? Like, I feel like there's probably so much nostalgia in closing this chapter.
There is. I feel both. I feel happy and sad. When people asked me, they wanted a sequel, but I wanted a prequel because I wanted to, there were some older characters in Practical Magic, these 2 old aunts, and I wanted to know what their life was like. I think it's always so interesting, like that people in our family, that we can't really know them because we didn't know them when they were young.
Right.
So, the older people. So I went back to the 60s in New York City, which is my favorite time, favorite place, and wrote the rules of magic. And then I went further back to the 17th century and wrote the origin story of how the family began. And also the family has there's a family curse. So it's begun in one book. And now in this final book, I try to end the curse.
And talk to me about your relationship with magic. I love the letter that you wrote in the beginning of the book to your readers about how you found magic in the library when you were young, which I think is so beautiful and poetic. So elaborate on how that love for reading inspired your writing career and just your relationship with magic in general.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the library was the big place of escape. I was in a very unhappy childhood, had an unhappy childhood, and it was my escape. And I started out reading magic books. And I think that what you read as a kid influences you so much as a person and also as a writer. So one of the writers who I really love and still is my favorite writer is Ray Bradbury. And when I started reading his books, which took place in like everyday situations with magic, I started to kind of view the world, I think, in that way. And so in my books, the magic is really very mixed up with everyday life. And magic also includes things like hope and love and sisterhood and, family ties. So it's the magic of spells and charms and herbs, but it's also the magic of what people are to each other.
Now, you're releasing it in October. This is Halloween season. So, and I love everything you just said is so beautiful. But do you believe in witches and magic? And do you, with your research into these stories and ghosts, have you had any interesting encounters or any enlightening situations?
Well, for me, when I think about do I believe in magic, I always dressed up as a witch as a little girl. And still to this day, when there are so many options, there are still all these little girls who are dressing up as witches. And I always feel like it's because it's the female mythic character that has power. And I feel like there's still that draw to witchery and wanting to have that magic and that power. For me personally, I mean, really, in all honesty, I think for me, the magic has always been about books and words. And I think, reading is the best sort of magic.
I agree. Would you do another adaptation? And if so, which book would you choose to see on the screen?
Well, right now, the producer of Practical Magic also has the rights to the 2 other books in the past.
Okay.
And hopefully it will be a TV series of those 3 books.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm not involved in writing it, which is probably for the best because I'm so involved with these characters. I think for this, it really needs kind of a fresh eye or many eyes
Okay.
to translate it onto a TV screen. But I think it would make a great series. And there's just so much material. And there's also not that many shows about dynasties of women and the history of women. And so I just think it would be very unusual.
I would love, I mean, I would definitely watch that. So
Me too.
fingers crossed. Keep
I'm
me
waiting.
posted. Yes. So, and for someone who hasn't read this series, I know you can either read them in the order that they were written or in chronological order. What do you recommend?
I think I would start with Magic Lessons, which is chronologically takes
Okay.
place in the 17th century. It kind of sets you up for all the other books. That's the way I would read them, but it really doesn't matter. And they also kind of stand alone. You don't have to have read one, the first one, to have read this last one. So it really doesn't matter.
And now that I'm done the series, I'm craving another witchy book that includes love and magic. And I know, and you give you talk about a lot of different books in this book, but could
Yeah.
you give me like your top two recommendations for either a standalone book or a magical series?
Well, I have to say that Elizabeth Strout's publishing a book called Oh William, which I can't wait to read. I love her books. It's kind of a
Okay.
series. It's definitely not magic, and it's just magic because she's such an amazing writer. So I always would recommend her book. And there's also Chris Bojalian
Oh, I
wrote a
love
book
Chris.
about the witches, about a real case in Salem that he fictionalized. So I think if you want more witches, that would be a good one.
Okay, I haven't read that of his yet, so that's a good one. And then I also love how you have a quote from Matt Haig, who is one of my favorites, on the front, and it's I love Alice Hoffman, like it's so good. Like usually
Oh,
people go in depth with like this a very like wordy quote. What made you want to include that on the cover?
well, I love Matt Haig, I have to say, and I think The Midnight Library is such a great book. And it's such a great book for this time, I think, for the time of COVID, when I read it in a very depressed state, and it really changed things for me. I mean, it had a real effect on me. And I think
Too.
people are just being so emotional about that book. He's a terrific writer anyway, but this book is just kind of a perfect book.
I can't stress that enough too, because I'm someone, and I had him on the series and I talked to him about this. I'm always thinking of what could have been if I had done this, or if,
Yes.
if I made this move, oh, I should have done this when I was 25. But that book really puts everything into perspective. And you're like, no, just live in the present, be now. Like this is your reality. So just do it. And it's so well, I love that it's fictionalized too. It's not like a
Yes.
self-help book, which is
No, no, but it feels that way because it makes you feel
yes,
so much better about your own life, which
so
is
much
really
better.
kind of a rare thing. And I
Yeah.
think, for me with my books, I think it does kind of tune you into your own life and your own relationships with kind of mostly with the women
Hmm.
in your life, but with all of the people that you're close to, and the meaning of how important it is to have these relationships, that really in the end, it's that, love is the only thing that matters.
Absolutely. And I want to talk to you a little bit about location. So you're currently in Massachusetts. You grew up
Yeah.
on Long Island, and you're a lot of the books take place kind of everywhere, but there's always a draw to Salem when you're talking about
Yeah.
witches. So for you who has traveled and I imagine gone on book tours everywhere, what is it about the location and the setting that influences the story?
That's such an interesting question, because I always think that the setting is almost like a character,
Yeah.
that it is so important to me. And I think I'm drawn to Massachusetts. I mean, I live here, but also it has such a rich literary history. I mean, this is where American literature really began. So, and also as a New Yorker, I'm also drawn to all of the literary life of and the world of New York.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I agree. I think it's an important character, the location. For me, if I don't like the setting, I can't read it. Or it will influence how I feel about a story. So you've done so many wonderful things in your career. What is next for you? Which I hate to ask because this book hasn't even technically come out yet. It will by the time this airs, but what are you excited about coming up?
Well, I'm always working. So I'm working now on, but I never know if the book is the book until I finish it. So I'm working on a pre-biblical book, which is a lot of research, and that is always fun for me. It's difficult, but it's also fun for me. And then I'm working on something that's set in New England, kind of like a dark romance. So I'll see what happens. It's always kind of a journey for me. I never know which book will really I'll finish. It's kind of an experiment, for me also.
How far do you get into a book before you realize that maybe it's not one that you'll finish?
I mean, sometimes I can finish the book and then I realize this isn't the
Really?
book. So I just feel, usually there's something in that book that becomes something else in a way, or
Right.
some kind of theme or character, something that reappears, but sometimes it just doesn't work out. It's just like, you just never know. Nothing is for sure in writing.
Well, I love everything that you do. So I am so excited and so happy that you are, that you're still writing and that this is here for everybody. The Book of Magic, everybody has to read it. Read the whole series if you have not. Alice, it was so lovely talking to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So nice to talk to you.